Welcome to the Hazardous Communication Program. Introduction and overview of the course. Do you work around hazardous chemicals? If you do, you're not alone. Employees have a need and a right to know certain information about the chemicals that they're exposed to, the hazards of those chemicals, and how to protect themselves while at work. This concept is the purpose of the Hazard Communication Standard, HAZCOM, issued by the U.S. Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA. In this course, we'll examine the elements in a hazardous chemical communication program, important information to help keep you and your coworkers safe on the job. Please remember that at any time, if you or another employee has a question about a chemical or a situation and cannot find information or an answer from content provided, it is recommended that you ask a supervisor for more information. OSHA's Hazard Communication Standard specifies that employers must provide the following 5 elements in their workplaces for their employees. The goal of this course is to familiarize you with these elements, which are in place for your protection. 1. Materials inventory, a list of the hazardous materials present in your work area. 2. Safety data sheets, a detailed description of each hazardous material listed in the materials inventory. 3. Labeling. Containers of hazardous materials must have labels which identify the material and warn of its potential hazard to employees. 4. Training. All employees must be trained to identify and work safely with hazardous materials. 5. Written program. A written program must be developed which ties all of the above together. In this course, we'll cover all 5 elements, but our focus will be understanding the product labels and the safety data sheets, SDSs, that are an important source of information on the chemicals present in your environment. This course has 4 lessons. Lesson 1 introduces hazardous chemicals. Lesson 2 examines the labels on hazardous chemicals and the information they contain. Lesson 3 covers safety data sheets and the important information they contain. Lesson 4 introduces the hazardous chemical inventory, written program, and training requirements. At the end of this course, there will be a final assessment. A score of 80% or higher on the final assessment is required to pass the course. Hazardous chemicals. Hazardous chemicals are solids, liquids, or gases that can harm people, other living organisms, property, or the environment. Some examples of hazardous materials you may be familiar with include bleach, drain cleaner, and antifreeze. In order for a chemical to be classified as hazardous, it must have either a physical or health hazard associated with its use. Physical hazards deal with a chemical's potentially harmful physical properties. The globally harmonized system includes a number of physical hazard categories and associated pictograms, which we'll examine in the next few slides. GHS physical hazard categories include flammables, including pyrophoric substances, self-heating substances, and substances which emit flammable gases. Additional physical hazard classes in the GHS include oxidizers, gases under pressure, and substances which are corrosive to metal. Health hazards produce reactions within the body. Chemicals presenting health hazards can cause one to become ill. An acute health hazard results from a single, short-duration exposure to a chemical which produces an immediate ill response. A chronic health hazard results from frequent exposure over a longer period of time. Health hazards classes in the globally harmonized system include corrosive or burn hazards to skin and eyes, irritation hazards to skin and eyes, toxic substances, which may be harmful or fatal if ingested, inhaled, or absorbed, and substances which may cause cancer, organ damage, allergic reactions, or other health damage. Routes of entry describe the way the hazardous chemical enters the body. There are 3 primary routes by which chemicals can enter the body. They are 1. Inhalation or through breathing, 2. Ingestion through eating or swallowing, and 3. absorption through the skin or eyes. Injection is another route of entry for chemicals, which while rare in the workplace can occur through mechanical injury, such as being punctured by a sharp object. Fortunately, there are ways to protect yourself from hazard chemicals. Personal protective equipment, PPE, provide a barrier to the routes of entry. Masks protect against inhalation. Shields protect against ingestion. Gloves and safety glasses protect against absorption through skin or eye contact. That's all for Lesson 1, Hazardous Chemicals. To review the main points, in order for a chemical to be classified as hazardous, it must have either a physical or health hazard associated with its use. A physical hazard deals with a chemical's physical properties, and a health hazard produces reactions within the body. There are 3 primary routes of entry for a hazardous chemical into the body: inhalation, ingestion, or absorption. Personal protective equipment provides a barrier to the routes of entry and helps protect you from exposure to hazardous chemicals. Understanding product labels. This lesson addresses the labels that are required on product containers. At the end of this lesson, you should be able to name the required label elements on a hazardous label and list other helpful information that can be found on a product label. Remember that in order for a chemical to be classified as hazardous, it must have either a physical or health hazard associated with its use. As someone who works in a facility where chemicals are present, you need to know how to protect yourself and where to find information about the chemicals in use. Labels provide important information about the product contained within. They're typically your first source of information about the chemical. The information on the label and in the safety data sheet come from a professional evaluation of the chemical conducted by the manufacturer or importer. Every manufacturer's label is different. You should familiarize yourself with the structure of the labels on the products used in your workplace. All labels on hazardous chemical containers are required to have these elements: product identifier, supplier identification, pictograms related to physical and health hazards, a signal word, a hazard statement, a precautionary statement, and supplemental label information. All of these must be plainly indicated. The standard will require these elements on labels by June 1st, 2017. Click on the markers to learn more. It is anticipated that a workplace label will require the following information, although requirements may differ in your local area: product name, which must match the SDS product name; safe handling precautions, which may include pictograms or other supplier label information; a reference to the SDS if available. Hazardous chemicals are required to be labeled, and even though each manufacturer's label is different, all are required to contain these elements: a product identifier, the supplier identification, pictograms related to physical and health hazards, a signal word, either danger or warning, a hazard statement, and a precautionary statement. Reading safety data sheets. This lesson will help you locate desired information about a product in its safety data sheet, SDS. In this lesson, you'll learn to use the safety data sheet to locate important information about a product. In order to perform your job effectively, productively, and safely, you need to know about the products that you use and how to dispense, handle, and dispose of them safely. The Safety Data Sheet, or SDS, is the recognized and required document for information for each chemical product used in your facility. SDSs are the same as MSDSs, or Material Safety Data Sheets. The name recently changed to comply with a globally harmonized system. The purpose and information contained on safety data sheets remains the same. Every product that is classified as a hazardous product that is intended for use, handling, or storage in a workplace and have an SDS. Employers are required to make sure that each hazardous product has an up-to-date SDS when it enters the workplace. The SDS must be readily available to the workers who are exposed to the hazardous product, and to the Health and Safety Committee or representative. SDSs are required to be accurate at the time of sale. Suppliers will be required to update an SDS when the supplier becomes aware of any significant new data. This new definition means that an SDS must be updated when there's new information that changes how the hazardous product is classified, or when there are changes to the way you'll handle or store the product, or protect yourself from the hazards of the product. Suppliers will be required to update the SDS within 90 days of becoming aware of the new information. If you purchase a product within this 90-day time period, the supplier must inform you of the significant new data and the date on which it became available in writing, which is replacing the 3-year update rule. An SDS may be found in a binder, in a collection of laminated cards or printouts, or on a company's computer. Diversey has prepared an SDS for each of its products and makes these available through a telephone call to Diversey at 1-888-352-2249 or via the website www.diversey.com. Before you use any chemical product, you must read the SDS to find out what safety precautions are needed. By reading the SDS beforehand, valuable time is saved in the event of an accident. While each SDS may look a bit different, they all must provide the same information organized in 16 sections. Basically, the SDS informs you on how to safely handle and store the chemical. In the identification section, look for the product name, product use, SDS number, the manufacturer's address, validation date, and an emergency phone number. The Hazards Identification section contains much of the information from the globally harmonized system, such as a list of the GHS hazard classes and categories which have been assigned to the chemical, pictograms of related physical and health hazards, hazard statements and precautionary statements, a short description of the hazards, typical ways that users may come into contact with the chemical, potential health effects, and symptoms of overexposure when applicable. The Composition and Information on Ingredients section lists any chemical substance required to be listed by OSHA and chemicals responsible for health or special hazards. Important information on first aid and emergency medical procedures are provided in the First Aid Measures section. They include what to do if you get the chemical in your eyes, what to do if you get it on your skin, what to do if you breathe the product, what to do if you swallow the product, and what medical conditions are aggravated by exposure to the product. Firefighting measures list fire and explosion hazards and provides instructions for firefighting measures. For safe spill or leak cleanup steps and proper waste disposal, look in the Accidental Release Measures section. The Handling and Storage section provides information that's also on the product label. It explains how to handle and store the product and the empty container. Under normal operating conditions, protective equipment such as footwear, safety glasses, gloves, or engineering controls such as the use of a local exhaust system may be necessary to avoid harmful exposure. The Exposure Controls Personal Protection section lists the recommended equipment for standard operating procedures. The Physical and Chemical Properties section lists laboratory measurements for the product. For example, some of these may be of use for product identification and safe handling. The Stability and Reactivity Data section shows how stable the product is, what can contribute to the instability of the product, and what other chemicals are incompatible. Any known or suspected acute or chronic toxicity caused by the product is reported in the Toxicological Information section. The Ecological Information section reports the impact of the product spills or other emissions on the environment. Precautions needed to dispose of a product are provided in the Disposal Considerations section. Not listed but expected are the following: the requirement to observe all federal, provincial, and state regulations, as well as local or municipal ordinances regarding disposal, and the requirement to include how products must be labeled for disposal, including how to be neutralized and how to have special handling by a regulated or certified agency. 2 sections include information on transportation and other regulations by the federal governments of the United States and Canada, as well as by states and provinces that have enacted additional regulations. The information in these sections is also available on the product package. The Transport Information section refers customers to the Bill of Lading for DOT classifications. Detailed information on transporting specific products can be found on this website, naextranet.diversey.com/DOT. Regulatory information includes information on regulations, including the U.S. EPA Toxic Substances Control Act, TSCA, and the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, CEPA. The Other Information section carries other information that the manufacturer wishes to provide. In this case, there's a note that the product contains an added fragrance. That's all for this lesson on rail safety data sheets. At this point, you should be able to identify the elements of safety data sheet and be able to locate the desired information on SDS. Communication and training. This lesson covers the remaining elements of a hazardous communication program: the chemical inventory, training requirements, and the written program. You'll learn to describe the purpose of a hazardous chemical inventory, list the training requirements for hazardous chemicals, and identify the purpose of a written hazard communication program. A hazardous chemical inventory is a listing of hazardous chemicals that are used or stored within the facility. This inventory must include all hazardous chemicals used in the facility, hazardous chemicals taken off-site for use in other locations, and hazardous chemicals stored away from the main plant. This inventory provides information on chemicals that have physical or health hazards in an employee's immediate work area and also surrounding areas. How does a chemical end up on the hazardous chemical inventory? The answer is the chemical manufacturer or importer must evaluate every chemical for hazardous properties. Based upon their evaluation, the hazards found are placed on container labels and MSDSs, then shipped to the company. The label and SDS is then reviewed by a named person in a job role to do so and placed on the inventory. It's the company's responsibility to maintain a hazardous chemical inventory. OSHA regulations require that hazardous chemical training is made available to employees who may be exposed to hazardous chemicals when working. It must include the following: chemical-specific training, safety precautions, and emergency and first aid training. An employer is required by OSHA Hazard Communication Standard to protect employee safety at work by developing a hazardous chemical written program and making it widely available for viewing. This written program must include information on each of the elements discussed in this course: product labeling program, SDS information program, chemical inventory, and training program. In addition, the written program can include information about methods for informing employees of hazards for non-routine tasks and chemicals contained in unlabeled pipes, procedures for informing contractors and employees of hazards in the workplace, procedures for making sure the contractors notify employers of hazardous chemicals in the workplace or those they may bring into the workplace, and the names of those in charge of labeling, SDS collection, and inventory. Do you know where the company's written program is located? When you find out, write down the location so it's easily accessible. Even though it's the company's responsibility to maintain the hazardous chemical communication program, employees are the ones who work near the chemicals and should be aware of the risks involved. Therefore, it's to every employee's advantage to help keep the program current by updating the chemical inventory, reading labels and SDSs before working with a new chemical, and attending and using the training you receive. To summarize this final lesson, employers are required to keep a written hazard communication program, an inventory of all the chemicals used in the facility, and provide training on the hazard communication program for employees.